Welcome to the Revolting Bodies podcast,
where the people are talking,
the conversation is flowing,
and the bodies are revolting.
We are your revolting hosts. I am Darcy.
I'm Grace.
Before we begin, as a content warning, every episode of the Revolting Bodies podcast involves discussions that engage with issues surrounding body image.
Some of our guests will be talking openly and explicitly about their experiences throughout the podcast.
We have aimed to make this podcast a safe space for these discussions, but if this sensitive content has the potential to cause you any distress or harm, then this podcast might not be right for you.
Today's episode is called The Queer Body, which will involve personal and honest discussions around the topic of queerness. This episode contains references to sex, mental health, and transphobia.
All right, so we have some lovely guests with us today. The Queer Body, yeah.
Hello, I'm Irene and I'm queer, yay! No, I identify as non-binary, and I really like this kind of conversation, especially about the queer body, because for me it's so difficult because I am gender fluid. My gender will literally change within the day, and so the body dysmorphia is like so real, and I can't really dress appropriately for it, for example, because I will wear a dress and then an hour later I'll be out of the house and be like, I can't have a dress right now, and it's like just this weird situation. So the queer body is just something I'm really interested in, and also dysmorphia, and yeah.
Hey, I'm Haris. I identify as a gay male. I think the reason why queer bodies is something that I was pulled towards is because my own experience is that I've seen it as a thing that sort of almost segregates the queer community as well, which I think is very difficult. So particularly what I've been looking more into recently, like within my art or whatever you want to call it, is the idea of like tribes, because I've come to realize that's a very prominent thing, especially within the gay community. But yeah, that's all I've got.
Hi, I'm Evie. I'm pan. So there's kind of two reasons that I'm really interested in this. So as someone who is attracted to all genders, I find my body and my sexuality is kind of constantly under scrutinization. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Scrutiny and like sexualization, particularly from like straight men. But also I'm really interested in this idea that gender is kind of a projection of like our cultural and social understandings of what gender is. So, you know, if it's, for example, if it's not what's between your legs, what is gender? It's just these sort of patriarchal ideas of what a woman and a man is. So for me, I don't identify as a particular gender because I don't believe that gender should exist at all, which is what really interests me, I guess.
I'm super excited to hear this whole conversation now. The first question that I want to just kick off this conversation, what is the queer body? How would you define that? Can you define it?
That's a big question.
Really big question. I feel so erased, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Hard, just no.
I think it's a lot of what Harris was talking about, like queer bodies, especially when you put it under like the title of queer or like LGBTQ+. It kind of refuses to recognize all of the different bodies and people within it and how diverse the community is, and like it kind of suggests that there's the straight body and then everyone else. I don't know, it's hard to define because obviously it's a conversation we have to keep having about queer bodies and their inclusion and representation, particularly in the media, but there's so much within it that just calling it queer is kind of a bit stupid. Yeah.
I think for me personally, when I think of the queer body, like the word that comes to mind is fluid, and that ideally we don't sort of succumb to any sort of label or any sort of expectations, you know, almost. And because to me, like the word queer means we're fluid, we're kind of open, but I think the reality of that is that for some reason is still very labeled, but I can't really describe what that might be like.
It also depends on the country, I think, because for example in France everything's gendered, so the queer body literally doesn't exist. Like it's a really hard thing to explain, but we've just started having gender neutral pronouns. Like literally this year it like got translated into English. So I think there is a big thing of where is the queer body allowed to exist as well, and what is its existence. Just, yeah, I think there's also this weird thing for me, the queer body. There's also this thing of like, there's what straight people think of the queer body, and then there's like the actual queer body, which is anything and everything. But it's not like, for a lot of straight people, it's like hot and sexual and political, and it's like, we're just allowed to exist. The queer body should just be allowed to exist. But right now, we're just not, for some reason.
I like that phrase that you've used, anything and everything. I think that is something that really stands out, is that I think that's what the queer body is or should be, you know.
It's interesting you mentioned gender neutral pronouns in France, and I wanted to ask you about this actually, because I know that when I was studying French, do you guys have like a ministry for like the French language and like keeping it French? Have those pronouns been put through that ministry? Is it a ministry?
No, it's not exactly a ministry. It's like an academy, basically. It's a bit complicated. It's been there literally since forever. Like swear words have just gone through, I think, but I'm not too sure, so it definitely hasn't. I just know it because I'm part of the queer community, and we're starting to use it. Before we were like, what do we even say? Like, it was just a thing of like, what do we say? We don't know. And we just use the equivalent of he, basically, to be, but he in plural, which is also he in French. And that just wasn't satisfying in any way, shape or form for many of us. So no, absolutely not. I don't even know. Probably in 50 years it will be, but it takes a lot of time also. Like, it takes a lot of time for any word to go through this, because it's like old white dinosaurs that look at a word for years and be like, actually, that's acceptable. So
this is kind of what I was talking about with like societal and like cultural depictions of what gender is. So, for example, in France, you only have like male and female pronouns, and that's for like literally everything. Like a table is like, table is feminine.
Woman. Yes.
Yeah. And like, for example, in the West, we kind of have these like patriarchal ideas of like, tell me, if you're walking down a street, right, and we don't have X-ray vision, we can't see what's between people's legs, and also that doesn't matter. Give me an example of what would make you think that's a girl, right? Let's think long hair,
dress,
how they're dressing.
Yeah.
And the only way we know that is what we've been taught, right?
Mm-hmm.
So besides, for example, like your features, but I have quite masculine features. I have like quite a strong jawline, but I have quite feminine, I don't know, hands. I have small hands. I don't know. Apart from like your biological features, literally what defines it, apart from like culture and society, and therefore like in different parts of the world and in different cultures, gender is different. And like in Hinduism and Judaism, I think they recognize like a third gender. So like
it's the golem, it's more complicated. It depends on the Judaism, and it depends.
Yeah. Well, I can't pretend to know a lot about those, but I was reading about it because I was having an argument with someone about intersex and whether it exists or not. I just think it's a really interesting thing to consider, that is gender anything but what we've been taught, the things that surround us. And like, I think that the French language is sort of quite an obvious example of that. That makes literally no sense. Sorry.
No, it's really good. It's really good.
Young, like it starts like, basically I have a nephew. I was gonna say a mini nephew, but no, nephew that is just small, 4 years old. And like he went to the house the other day, and his parents are like, you know, not particularly problematic in any way. They're just French parents, and he saw me paint my nails, and he was like, can I have some? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. He's like, oh no, wait, my mom doesn't want me to have my nails painted. And I was like, why? And he was like, I just can't. And I was like, you can, bro. Like, we've had this conversation that you can actually paint your nails. Your parents and society are just saying that you can't. And it was just this weird thing of like, he's 4 years old. Like, he's 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just so odd, right? It's like these small things have become such almost statements, like say like with painting nails and things like that. Like if you literally think about it, it's paint or nails, but like you're like cultured or whatever, like have made it something that is so separate, and something like, oh, only you can have it, only you can. And if, for example, a male puts it on, it becomes something like, oh, that's something new and something different. And yeah, I don't know, it's just I think it goes back to what Evie was saying of, it's something that's taught, and it's a learned behavior almost, you know.
Yeah. And I think also there's this culture right now of like straight men, particularly like in music. If they wear like a skirt or like a big glittery eyeshadow or like nail polish, they're suddenly queer representation king, and they're like defying toxic masculinity. And I'm big for that. Like toxic masculinity, I think that's a big part of my feminism, that I think that men suffer enough as well as much as women. Well, no, not as much as women do, but men suffer a lot from these patriarchal ideas that we have of like what a man is. I'm all for it, but like it's literally nail polish and it's a skirt. And like in the olden days, men used to wear skirts because it worked better, and if they still do in Scotland, like it's not that big of a deal. But we've built up these like massive ideas of what gender is and what is okay to wear and do as a particular gender, that when like Luke Hemmings, who I absolutely love, when he does it, it's like, oh my god, he's so cool. And it's like, it's not that big of a deal. He's just expressing himself, and he's just wearing and doing what he wants to do because he should be allowed to do that, and it doesn't mean anything. This thing where we have to keep trying to like, everyone thinks that Harry Styles is bi or pan or whatever, and he's like, it just doesn't matter. He said, it doesn't matter what I am. I just do what I want and I have sex with who I want, and why is it your problem? That's so right. What does painting your nails, what difference does that make?
What the queer body does is that it challenges these sort of expectations or this kind of things that we've been taught. Yeah.
Also, then as soon as it challenges it, then the straight world takes it and says, now it's cool, and now we're not allowed to have it anymore.
Just listening to everything you guys are saying, yeah, it's just really interesting how this kind of fits into another chat we were having, like to do with the media and stuff, and how that has a huge play. So like obviously celebrities, which you guys have referred to, you know, whenever they do stuff, people put labels on it, and it becomes trends and all these things. And the way you've described the queer body, it's like when it becomes this thing where we're like, oh, this person is so cool, it kind of
gets appropriated.
It rips away the essence of what you guys are describing it to be. It's so interesting listening to you guys talk about it, because
yeah, I think historically, like it has always, I mean, historically, like in the last 100 years and possibly before, but I don't really know, it has always quite often been that like queer communities and Black communities create these cultures and these really interesting, you know, music, fashion, even language, and then it kind of gets taken by like white straight people, like the Yas Queen thing. Which literally makes me cringe because I just think it's a bit lame, but like it comes from Black queer communities, and suddenly it gets taken by some straight girl that wants to have a gay best friend. And I don't want to like shit on that, because I'm all for like the sharing of culture, obviously not when it's appropriated, but I think that, you know, culture and joy is all for sharing, but I think it's really important to recognize where it comes from, and not to you know, you can't take stuff that queer people and Black people are saying and doing and creating and then also continue to oppress queer and Black people, which is obviously what appropriation, like I'm not saying anything new here. It's something that I kind of had never really thought that I was going to experience. But then as I became more and more like more queer and less gender conforming, I started to notice that, you know, you get a lot of cis people and straight people who will be quite outwardly horrible to you about your identity, and then will go and like go to Pride, and because they're like, oh, it's a party, and like wear rainbow things in their hair, but they'll like call you a dyke, you know. I obviously don't want to say dyke because it's not a very nice word, but I have been called it, so I'm kind of allowed to say it. Yeah. And I never thought that I was going to experience that, because I thought it was like, you know, like a racial cultural thing, but I think that queer communities also really experience it, and it's quite jarring.
I think one of my favourite memes ads that I've ever seen is, you know, during Pride Month, where like every shop ever becomes suddenly gay, And I saw a thing, and it was just this ads, like this fake ad said, "Hello LGBTQ plus sexuals, we love you, buy our products." And it was just the way they were like talking. It's basically that every time. And it's like, I don't know, I've never been to Pride in London yet. I was supposed to go this year, but but in Paris, the chariots, is it called the chariots? We have like Tinder and Google and big corporations there that are just with us, and it's like so weird, and people just walk behind the chariots. They're like best for the music, and I'm like, you shouldn't be walking behind the chariot because you like the music of Google. That's not right. But they took it, and now we don't have a Pride anymore. Like, it's really weird because now Pride is a big pie, and
It's like capitalized, like they want to make money off of it. I'm sure can be really, really insulting because that's not really in the spirit of that, is it? So I think, and then I think also there's like this really thing about like the reclaiming of these spaces and of these terms, as you were saying, and I'd love to hear more about that, how you think you've reclaimed identity, or whether that means anything to you, or whether it's just not a good question. I don't know.
I think personally for me, it's having these conversations because going back to like what even Irene was saying about it becoming a trend almost, was that I remember being like a kid in kindergarten wanting to play like dress up and things like that in school, and I wanted to wear like a princess dress or things like that, and I was actively being told by people, no, that's not okay, right? And then this kind of followed through like my older years as well. Like if I wore pants that kind of like would, if I stand too close, the pants look like a skirt and things like that, I would get made fun of. And so when I see people taking on these trends now and being like, oh my, that's so woke, I love that kind of thing, I do try to have these conversations and be like, okay, that's great that you've seen that now, but also remember that there were tons of people who were told not to do that before. And you need to acknowledge that while you're appreciating that culture, that it's, and I think that's, to me, what reclaiming it is. Not like a thing of like, oh, I'm so hipster and cool, I did it before. Like, it's not so much about that, but it's knowing that for us to have gotten to that point where it's acceptable, quote unquote, and also a trend, it took many people being kind of shat on and having to push that boundary before anything, and it's getting that information into people's heads that I think is how I try to like reclaim it in a sense, I guess. Yeah.
I think also it's important to recognize that we have a lot further to go. There's been this, not necessarily pandemic, but like huge mediatization. I'm so bad at long words, of like the killing of Black trans people in the US and in the UK. And I think as queer, I don't want to say queer culture, because like wearing skirts and nail polish, yes, it began, and obviously everything else that surrounds skirts and nail polish, that's so stupid to put it in that section. Yes, it began like as queer people pushing those boundaries, but it's not that big of a deal. Like, it's nice to see cis heterosexual people embracing it, because it's just about breaking down, what's expected of us. But I think it's important to recognize that just because you have someone who's famous wearing long hair and like eyeshadow, it doesn't mean that people aren't still being killed for who they are and for what they look like. And I think maybe that is a danger. It's both a danger and a positive of like it being normalized. Is as it gets normalized, you get less people being oppressed for who they are, but also you need to recognize that particularly white people and white people who pass as a certain gender have privilege, that they have a body that is passable to, I don't know. And that's a fight that we have to be joining people with, if you see what I mean.
There's really a thing like you're right about like being really loud and like never really being satisfied. There's this thing now in the media where now outline movies, we're supposed to be happy because there's at least one gay character in every movie now, but that's not particularly, like I will forever remember was it in Finding Dory? Apparently there's two lesbians, like there's one frame when there's two people with short hair that are holding hands, and everyone's like, wow, this is amazing, this is so cool, this is such a progress. And I'm like, no, it's not a progress. And Disney, like, this is the only thing we can have, and then Elsa can have a girlfriend because apparently it's like too forward or whatever. For me, also reclaiming my identity is being really loud about it and being like, I am proud to be non-binary, and I'm proud to be bisexual, because like bisexual erasure is also such a thing. Like Janet in A Good Place, where I keep being like, not a woman, because people keep being like, hi, this is Irene, this girl. I'm like, not a woman, no. And it's just like constantly being loud, and it's really exhausting sometimes, and sometimes you just have to let it slip as well for your own good. But it's just constantly keeping on affirming that body and saying that we exist. And
we need more we need more queer bodies in media and fame spaces, not just some straight guy that wears nail polish, because that's not good enough queer representation. And things like having trans people play trans characters and not making it necessarily a big deal that they're trans, or, you know, a continuation of that is having disabled people play disabled characters. It's just this whole like intersectional thing of there isn't one type of person, and there shouldn't be one type of person in Hollywood, and you can't have like straight people and everyone else, like I was saying earlier. You've got to recognise that humans are infinitely different and infinitely flawed, and representing those people in the media is really important to stop kids from hating themselves. I came out as bi when I was like 12, but I always used to say I was bisexual and heteroromantic because I couldn't see myself in a relationship with a woman. I'm now out as pan, because I feel like that suits me better, and I totally can see myself in a relationship with anyone. But that took me until like 2 years ago, when I started to see one of my friends date a girl, where I was like, oh, I can actually see myself doing that. And then I realized it was because I'd been raised on a media where it's like boy meets girl, boy and girl falls in love, they fall out, boy stands outside the window with a boombox. And we won't get into my issues with rom-coms, because that's like, I could literally write like a dissertation on rom-coms. But yeah, so even for me, I've experienced this kind of thing where I didn't see myself represented. And so I spent so I came out when I was 12, and so I spent like 5 or 6 years not realizing my full potential as a person, and as like a person who can love. And there was someone who I realize now that I was really into and I really liked, and I should have pursued it when I was younger, but now she is a million miles away and I can't see her. It really sucks, because I always thought I just wanted to be her best friend, but the media stopped me from being able to, you know, as I said, realize my full potential. And I think that it takes, a lot of people don't understand that when it's portrayed, like when it's a part of your life, you can't recognize that it makes it harder for the people who it's not in their life. So like queer people who aren't represented, or people of colour who aren't represented, someone who's white and straight who've been represented their whole life, they can't understand why it's such a big deal, because it's just a no-brainer to them. But if you've lived it, it's then really hard to explain why it's such a big deal. But it took me until I was like 17 or 18 to realise who I was, and that puts me behind a bit, because I've only dated men and I don't know how to flirt with anyone else. Yeah, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it's really important, and I think we have a lot further to go.
Like I had the exact same experience, which is quite telling, which is I didn't know what the word bisexual was until I was 16. Like I had never encountered it. France is just not the best country for that. I just didn't know what it was. And there was this girl, again, I thought I wanted to be her best friend. I was clearly in love with her. Like, I think this is such a universal experience. And yeah, like, I just didn't know what the word was. I was writing on English forums some like stories with like a friend that was English. And then it was this one girl that had broke up with the guy in the story. And my friend was like, how about we make her date this girl? I was like, that's impossible. Because, you know, I didn't know it was a thing. I just didn't. And then I learned that bisexual was a thing, and I was like, that's me. But like, it took me so long, you know?
It took you to creating your own representation in the media to realise that you could be represented.
Yeah, and it took
God, that's so harsh.
It really is. And the thing is, like, thankfully I had this, because like, it's not like I could even Google it or something, because I didn't have even the words, you know? You're not going to Google, what is it like when you like a girl and a boy? Like, that's not, you don't do
You're going to get porn for starters, which isn't great for like a 9-year-old.
So it's just this weird thing of like, I'm lucky I just fell into that, but, you know?
I think that maybe what you've said about like not knowing what it is, possibly there's more people who are queer and haven't realized it and will never realize it because they don't know or they're not accepted. I can't pretend to know anything about the science of it, but surely.
No, I was just gonna say, I think though, like the thing is like with media representation as well, specifically about queer bodies and things like that, is yes, I think it's important, and like we've seen that without it, younger people aren't able to like identify or like figure out their identity, you know. But I think the issue now with the representation that we're seeing is that it tends to be very stereotypical, or like we still aren't at a point where we're showing queer bodies in all shapes and forms, you know, like what we were saying earlier of it being fluid, or, you know, we're still associating, for example, gay men to like feminine, for lack of better terms, feminine qualities. And I think the issue with that then is that someone watching it might just be like, well, I don't fall into that category, so I guess I'm not. And I think that in itself is also very problematic. And I think like for me personally, what I would like to see in terms of media representation is really the idea that the queer body is anything, you know, and that queerness manifests in whatever sort of way. Like, I remember I was watching The Politician on Netflix. I personally enjoyed it. There were like a mix of things, but, you know, some bits are like kind of problematic. But I remember there was this one character, as I was watching it, it made me realize that I had a very stuck idea of what a queer male identifying person like. So this character appeared to me like straight away. I was like, oh, he kind of talks in a quote unquote, like a better terms, feminine tone. And then like during one scene, he reveals that he was having sex with a woman. And I remember being like, whoa, that was not what I thought. And I was like, and I really had to challenge myself and be like, why did I make that assumption about that person's sexual identity based on how they were speaking, or how they were like kind of controlling their hands, or, you know, like, yeah, you know, like these kind of things. But I don't know, I think that was something that really shocked me about myself, that I was like, wow, I even have these preconceived notions, you know.
Yeah, also like if you get like a masculine gay man or queer man in the media, they're quite often like the butt of the joke. Yes. Or it's like, oh, I'm gay, look how woke this TV program is, we've got like a butch guy who works out who's gay. It's not like it's just, oh, he's gay, he's dating a man, not that big of a deal, let him go and save the world. It's like, I am a muscular man and I'm gay because we're so woke. It's like, it needs to be not that you have queer people because they're queer, you have queer people because they're people. I think that's really important, you know?
Like, it will start showing as well when they start just having queer people in the show that aren't suffering. Like, every time, like, I mean, obviously it's important to show coming out and everything, and like, that's difficult, but just let them be happy, man. Like, just let us be happy. Just, why can't there be like someone non-gender conforming that doesn't care about being non-gender conforming, they're just there, that's happy, that's fully realized, that's having a great job, and that, like, obviously they can have trouble, but that is not due to the gender and not due to like just their sexuality, because come on, like, a really good show for that is like She-Ra and the Princess of Power, which I know is for kids, but I love it. And it's also like, it's great because there's all types of body, and like there's just gay characters everywhere, just because it's normal, because that's it, because okay, we don't care, and that's just amazing. I'm watching it because it's just such a breath of fresh air as well, because it's the first show I've ever seen that's like that. Just let them be happy.
What's that called?
She-Ra and the Princess of Power.
I'm gonna write that down.
It's very good, and there's like literally just so much, like there's this main character, and she just doesn't have body that, like, you know, when you're like a fighter, like, you know, in every TV show that's like small and doesn't eat anything. No, she's just a normal girl that just has a normal body, and that is my body, and I'm like, oh my god, like, yes, I've never seen that before, literally never. So,
and I guess like listening to everything, it would be nice as well if the world just didn't have to comment on everything. Do you know
Yes.
like I know I'm a hypocrite for saying this, like we all comment on stuff, we all have opinions, it's human nature, but at the same time some things just don't say it out loud. You don't have to talk for the sake of talking. Like you don't need to comment on everything that you see. And you know, if a person's enjoying life, let them enjoy life. If they're painting their nails, let them paint their nails. You don't
Exactly
need to comment on everything. For me, this is something that I'm definitely trying to incorporate in my life, and just me as a person. I'm trying to just stop commenting on everything that doesn't concern me and doesn't, you know, I don't have the right to comment on certain things. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like, yeah, there's sometimes you just don't need to speak. You don't need, like, because then it turns into this whole thing where, you know, people get upset. Like, it's hurtful. And it's just like, people should be who they want to be. And that's cool. You know, we should embrace everyone's uniqueance because we're all different, you know?
We're all human. We all get buried in the same size coffin. I remember when I was like 15 or 16, I was at a friend's house, and for some reason we got onto the topic of pride with her mum. If she hears this, which she probably won't, I'm not shitting on your mum. She just said something that hurt me, and she said something like, I don't have a problem with gay and queer people, but like I just find it really annoying that they have to constantly talk about it and be putting in our faces. And I remember she had to, like, my friend had to go outside with her mum and be like, you know, she's queer, right? Like, you know, she likes girls. And her mum was like, so? I don't have an issue with it. She doesn't talk about it, so it's not that big of a deal. And it's that kind of thing. Like, I agree. I don't want to have to constantly be talking about my queerness because it's not what defines me. What defines me is like the books I read and the people I circulate with and the things I create and the way that the things that I enjoy wearing and the music that I listen to. Who I sleep with is none of your fucking business.
People just nosy.
This is the thing, but the fact is that we have to constantly be talking about it to feel like recognized, and we have to constantly, you know, to be represented in the media, we have to constantly be like, so when are you going to have your first gay character, Disney? When are you going to have your first openly gay character, Disney? And I don't want to have to constantly be talking about it, but in order for it to be like, it's like a kind of vicious cycle that in order for it to be normalized, we have to keep talking about it. But the more that we keep talking about it, it kind of others us, because it's like queer people just want to talk about being queer and all they care about is queer characters in the TV, and it's not true. We want to be humans, but we can't be humans because you make our queerness such a big deal for us to just be represented and just be accepted. And all I want is for you to like use the right pronouns or something, but I have to keep talking about it. Actually, pronouns aren't that big of a deal for me, but like, you know, for a lot of people they are, and you have to keep being like, you're using the wrong pronouns, can you please use the right pronouns? And then they're like, oh, stop fucking reminding me that you're queer. I know, I don't care. And it's like, okay, so use the right pronouns for me. Are we gonna represent people like me, or are we gonna just pretend that they don't exist because they're here and I'm shouting about it, but I don't want to?
It's the thing that I find that like the queer body is just always political, and I don't know how I feel about that per se. Like, you know, I feel like whenever you find someone that's a bit androgynous, like immediately they become like a statement, or people go to them to like ask them about their sexuality or ask them to talk about the movement and talk about, you know, kind of larger issues at hand. And I feel like immediately when you have a queer body, they become political. But I don't know how I feel about that, because I think like what you were saying, Evie, on one hand, I think it's good that we're having these conversations, but on the other hand, it's very difficult because then we keep getting stuck in that, right? Like where we're always having to explain and things like that. So I guess like it's one of those things where like if we're talking about representation, kind of what Irene and Evie, both of you were saying, is like maybe it's time we start like normalizing it almost, you know, I guess. I don't know. But then are we normalizing it? Are we kind of taking away the idea of queerness? I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up like this normalization, and does it like stop, does it like stop the representation of queerness? I've recently watched Euphoria, which I loved because it's an aesthetically pleasing show, but Jules is trans, and Jules is played by a trans actor. And to be fair, everyone in Euphoria is pretty fucked up. Like, do I mean Jules? No. Wait, is Jules Zendaya?
No.
I
I've
haven't.
heard-
I don't know.
Wait, hang on. Let me just Google the cast. Yeah, Jules is Hunter Schafer. Okay. Obviously, they don't make a big deal about her transness, but she like sleeps with a bunch of older men who, I don't really want to spoil it for you guys, but it's not that big of a deal. She sleeps with a bunch of older men who are on gay dating apps for young feminine men, because that's the only way she can, before she meets Rue, it's the only way she feel loved and feel sexually wanted. And she also kind of goes a bit mental and like does some drugs and drinks and goes off the rails a bit and like abandons Rue because she doesn't feel like accepted. And I enjoyed her representation because I enjoyed the fact they didn't make a big deal about the fact that she was trans. I think they only mention it like once or twice, and her parents are her dad is perfectly accepting. I don't think her mum's around. But the fact that even then she has to have this thing where she's only loved by older men who want to fuck teenage boys. Come on. It could have been so good that you have this beautiful, wonderful trans actress who's playing a trans character who is in a relationship with a woman. Why do you have to make a thing about she's not wanted and she's only wanted by people who only care about her genitals? Like, it could have been so good. And yes, it's got nominated for Emmys and stuff, but like just that little thing really niggled with me because there's so, it was so close. And it could have been like a huge step in normalizing queer characters in mainstream TV, because you have quite a lot in like indie TV, but like Euphoria is kind of the first one that I really have recognized. But there still had to be a storyline about her queerness.
It sets up a kind of like image, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That then when you think of a label, you pair it with all this other
these ideas,
ideas that come with it. And that's, but at the end of the day, again going back to the fact that everyone is different, everyone will experience things in their own way, and not every person is the same.
Situation of like, I mean, there is such a thing, actually, it's not is there's such a thing in the queer community of like looking a certain queer enough way to be part of that to be allowed to be even part of that discussion. Like, I am queer and I am gender fluid and I don't particularly dress a certain kind of way. I don't have to look any kind of way to be non-binary and be talking about my experience. And it's weird. I really thought of that the other day. Like, there is also a lot of things in the queer community of how we should be allowed to look, to be allowed to be queer. And it's weird because give us some space.
It's funny that you said, Irene, that you brought up, you said, do I look non-binary enough? And it's funny because like the term non-binary, but yet we're still trying to put a binary to it, like we're trying to make it a categorized thing, when in reality the whole point, to me at least, of what queerness is that it doesn't abide to any sort of category. But I think with queer bodies is within the queer community itself, we kind of make those little judgments, and I don't know, I think that's just something that's really weird.
I've got one. Google exists, right? Don't make assumptions about who we are from what we look like and what we do, and don't ask us intrusive questions because of how you view our bodies. Google is there for a reason. It exists for a reason. It's www.google.com. Everyone knows what it is. Or use Google Scholar. I'm tired of having to constantly talk about my queerness because I'm suddenly like, I post some stuff on my story and I'm suddenly the queen of the queers or whatever. Go and do your own research, learn. And if there is something that you're missing from that learning that you can't find, then come and ask us nicely and say, don't worry if it's too hard for you. Do your own research and become educated, and don't make assumptions. And you might find out something about yourself while you're doing that you didn't already know.
If you listen to this podcast and you still think there should be a straight pride, go to Google. Go on Google. No, there shouldn't be a straight pride. No, there should, come on, no, educate yourself. And if you are listening to this and you identify any kind of way, you are valid. We love you. You will find your community, even if you might not have it right now. You will. And don't go to straight pride. That's all.
I think my last sentence will be the queer body can look like any body. There is no specific look of what the queer body is. And I think that's just something, fact.
Go ahead.
Eat your greens and drink lots of water.
Yes.
Keep yourself healthy.
What great combo.
That was amazing. Thank you so much to all of our lovely guests.
It's so important to have these conversations and just keep being real, we love it. We love the realness. No fakeness allowed here.
This week we will be doing an episode called The Masculine Body, so stay tuned for that.
Conversation is never over.
Follow us on Instagram at Revolting Bodies.
Stay revolting.